The first thing is roll call, so we know who's here. Oral communications, it's time to address us on any item not on the agenda. Anyone? Becky?
Becky Steinbruner. I have two things to say. I first of all feel like this is a very important meeting and would be better lent having it at a regular meeting time of first or third Tuesday, and in a facility that community television could be recording. I am video recording the meeting tonight, and I will put it up on YouTube, but this is really important information, and I understand you've got full agendas, but I think it would be better to have included it as part of a regularly scheduled meeting. And second of all, again, I hope that the water transfers from the North Cove streams will be considered in your discussion tonight. I didn't see any information available online other than the agenda, the simple agenda. So I don't know if there's other information that is available, but I do hope that your discussion will include North Coast water transfers and fast-tracking the pipe loop study. Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none? The reason for this meeting, there will be actually a series of meetings probably off of this. There's a lot of issues to talk about. And this is just kind of a kickoff for those. I thought we wanted to get it started early. As you know, Tom and I and some staff went back east to have some discussions. We had done a feasibility study with some state funding, and then we did some further work on that feasibility to make it fit with the federal requirements for a feasibility study with some federal funding. And that got done the end of February, and we found out that the Bureau of Reclamation, which received that, put together a letter that they sent to Congress about funding at the beginning of February. So we've just missed it, and we were concerned about that, because if you miss it, it means you may have to wait a whole another year before you even get put into consideration. So I think that's now been resolved. They're going to send out another letter which will have our name on it. So given that, we need to do some work to put together our application for funding. So that's what we're starting to talk about. Huh?
Correct. Yeah, so I'm going to kick it off real quickly, and then we've got Anoop and Lydia here, our consultants, to help Melanie kind of focus in on tonight, the purpose of tonight's meeting. But before we dive into it, you know, sustainability, that's our mantra, right? Whatever it takes us to get there. But along that pathway, we know there's a lot of uncertainty to just achieving that. Look at our history. We tried with diesel, got derailed. There's all kinds of examples of utilities and people not achieving it and having seawater intrusion. Matter of fact, I'm often quoted as saying about 70% of the populated coastal regions of the world have seawater intrusion. So the consequence is high, the uncertainty is relatively high, but the consequence of failure is pretty drastic. So the various factors that influence that, they're technical, the understanding of the basin, political, that introduces uncertainty, social, you know, look at the housing crisis that's come to light that we didn't know, the ADU thing that's going on, financial, the grant information you could hear tonight, who could envision that, you know, the amount of money and that we might have available to us. Legal, think about Sigma that's come into it, and just environmental factors, think about climate change. So, you know, I want to put it out there, instead of trying to like predict the uncertainty factors and try to dial them in exactly, what can we do to reduce our vulnerability to them, just in a more global stage. Well, one of the things you generally do, and like people do at a lower level if they're like in the stock market, they place bets on various things, small bets on many options, so they kind of average out. And that's kind of what we're doing. We have the water transfer in our community water plan, we have decel, we have pure Water Soquel, and even combinations of those. So that's exciting. So those are the bets we have on various options out there to help us. But there's another way you can do it. You know, what the data shows, it's best not to sit back, but it's best to help shape your future. So being progressive, being active. But not only that, monitoring those changes as they come up and adjust as we move along. You know, again, Dr. Daniels put it out that, you know, this isn't so much a optimization project, but it's a risk mitigation project. And based on what we've seen on the SkyTIM data, that couldn't be even more true. We know that we have seawater intrusion at both ends of our district. Those are in our monitoring wells. And now the SkyTIM data show that it's right at the coast where we didn't know it. So, you know, we have an opportunity, and this is one of the messages we've carried back. Can I share that? You want to share it?
No, that was just what I was gonna add. It's just that so many places are trying to catch up and trying to fix something that's already broken. And we have an opportunity, pretty kind of a rare opportunity to know it's right at the door and we can actually stop it where it is. And so that's what's different.
Our rally cry is, we don't have to be like those other 70%. We have this unique opportunity. Nobody that I've ever known of in my career has known where it exists like this offshore, and especially this close. You know, this technology's only been used outside the United States. We're the first ones to do it with the SkyTIM data, the helicopter that flew offshore. So really exciting opportunity to stop it before it happens. I will say, you know, one of the maybe the best teachers we can have and moving forward is Mother Nature. You think about it, she's given us, you know, the sense of redundancy with 2 lungs, 2 kidneys, 2 eyes. So I put forth that notion of not thinking about just one water supply or this or that, a binary system, but more holistically. You know, isn't it time, you know, we start thinking in that approach. And I will say that, you know, usually the biggest risk lies in our, within us, really, and our abilities to underestimate what can go wrong, and our abilities to overestimate our ability to do what we think is right. So, you know, we are our own worst enemy in some ways. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melanie here. And again, to reiterate what Bruce said, this hopefully is a series of meetings, workshops that we can have to further move us down the road, because there's a lot of important decisions to make, because we know seawater intrusion is knocking at the door. So take it away, man.
And one last thing, just, I mean, we want to be as efficient as possible, to be able to be ready to make whatever decisions we can, so that we're not slowing things down, and we can get to the point where we're protecting the basin
Right.
as soon as possible. We just wanted to optimize that.
Yeah, and capitalize on this huge window of opportunity for our customers with potential funding, at least in this, up this avenue.
And to give you some idea, you know, just to the east of us here, Pajaro got $20 million from the feds for their project. So getting that kind of money would go a long way to help this happen here. And that doesn't include getting money from the state, too.
Yeah, and I'll add that Lydia was the driver behind that for Harlow Valley. So.
And you've gotten more than 20 million, right?
Yeah, Paro total, that's about 60 million for their 80 million.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay, so, you know, I think just turning off of what Ron said in terms of Mother Nature and some guidelines he gave us as the team is that, you know, we also have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So this is about active listening for staff and our team tonight to hear from the board. So we do have some slides, you know, a handful of slides that we wanted to kind of just walk through what our expectations and what our plan is for tonight. So we do want to just reaffirm the board's guiding principles on the water supply reliability and sustainability that we're trying to achieve. Again, it's just a touchstone. We've done this before. The board gave us some guiding principles in 2015. We reaffirmed them last year. Tonight, we just want to briefly reaffirm them as we go forward, because this is really the whole planning and driving forces that go behind what we'll be talking about tonight. Again, tonight's focus is on the Pure Water Soquel project. That doesn't mean that the other options aren't still under consideration. As Becky mentioned, we are doing river water transfer projects, as Ron mentioned, and you can see on our board, there are other water supply options that we're considering tonight. But because of these windows of opportunities, what we learned in Denver and in DC, we really want to kind of zero in and focus on some of the funding aspects and funding opportunities. So Our focus tonight is just, again, to reiterate that we have these parallel tracks going. We will talk specifically with some slides about the grant opportunities we have both from the state and the federal agencies. We also have low interest loans. We're not going to focus a lot on it tonight, but Lydia will cover briefly that we are looking at a diversified funding portfolio, grants, loans, and other sources. And then specifically, we have a new peer who is part of the Brown and Caldwell team, who has kind of lifted the hood and looked at what we've been doing over the last couple of years and understanding where we are and where we need to be in order to meet the board's goals. And then, of course, what are the implications, the budget implications? We've got a rate study going on, we've got an EIR underway, and we've got these milestones that we need to achieve. So as we go through this discussion, it will be iterative, but we would like to have some direction on some near-term guidance and direction on some of our tasks. So here's a slide that I just wanted to try to capture. This was very similar to a slide that we had back in January when we did our workshop there. It talked about the board's guiding principles. What we've been directed to do by the board and what we convey in all of our material is that we're preventing seawater intrusion from moving further inland. We're preserving our sole source of drinking water, and we're trying to create a barrier to protect the water. How are we doing that? We want to develop a water supply source that is drought resilient and reliable. We want to try and diversify our water portfolio. We want something that considers the impacts of climate change. The number that we're looking at in terms of a new supply is 1,500 acre-feet per year. And the board has, since 2015, put us on a pretty aggressive schedule of an 8 to 10 year window where a project is online and operational by 2022, 2023.
Which comes from the public's timeliness.
Yes, and so this here is that, with that information as well as input from our customers, the three values that they felt were most important in a water supply is timeliness, high water quality, and reliability. Is there anything that's changed that you feel you'd want to add or give direction to us on?
No, but can I just add one thing? As we go through this, that we have to, even before we make a decision on the Water Soquel project, there's some things we can do to make sure we get these opportunities for funding in before we can make a decision. It's just, if you wait till after that, you just lose a whole, at least a year of funding possibility and maybe the opportunity for funding.
One thing I told people on this trip is one way to do projects is you do the first step completely and think about it, make sure you did things right, and then do the next step and the next step. But that takes a long time. And we're actually trying to do things, in parallel as much as possible to get this timeliness.
Yeah, Lydia noted that in some of our materials that you guys were crossing out.
I crossed that out.
2023.
Yes.
And so she was
I
like,
crossed
how
that out.
important is that number versus that number? And, I think as we start talking about some of these things, how we can account for some, condensing if possible. Yep.
Yep.
Something that's not there, but it's obvious, I think the whole board would agree, but let me know if you don't, is that we don't want to waste customers' money on things that aren't likely to pay off.
Correct.
So, and, for me, that's it's hard to predict. It's hard to predict that. It's really hard to predict that. But there is a risk involved in pursuing any of these projects, as we learned from the desal project with the city of Santa Cruz. So hopefully we can, learn from that and go fast, but don't go so fast that we have a risk that's too great for the customers in terms of the cost of it.
But I mean, some of this moving forward is to make sure we're saving the customers' money.
I understand. I understand.
Thank you for
Not
capturing
putting on the
that.
list there, but it's cost effective, I guess you could
Cost effective, yeah.
Cost effective.
Yeah,
Whoa.
this is not, probably not
And
ideal.
one thing that's required to do that is to continually look at things and see, how's this going?
Reevaluate,
How's
yeah.
this going? We should stop doing it because it's clearly not gonna work for us.
Yeah, and when new information comes in, we adjust.
Evaluate.
Yeah, monitoring and adjust all along the way, absolutely.
This is exactly what Bruce was talking about, and I think it was kind of a theme when we were back in DC, is that, you know, we've got a lot of parallel tracks going on, and that was, you know, specifically designed with that 8 to 10 year goal that we had. So, you know, over the last couple of years, we've got the technical feasibility that's been underway. And these lines here represent that through this process, we have gotten board direction, and we've gotten board input along the way. We're doing the environmental track, so the technical feasibility fed into the environmental track. And then right now, we're really focusing a lot on the financial aspects of outside money, as well as, you know, our rate study that's underway. And all of this is gonna feed into, you know, the board decision on the project. And Anoop's gonna go more into detail on this, but this is just, again, that kind of parallel process.
And Melanie, would an analogous, or a sample of the technical feasibility be the, what was it, the National Water Research Institute panel, the independent panel that that evaluated the work that was being done and seeing whether the water was appropriately clean, and the Sentinel headline gave the thumbs
Yeah,
up?
Definitely, all that technical part, the feasibility studies that went underway, the evaluation of the sites, the
Okay.
reevaluation of sites, looking at the water quality.
Yeah, so that technical doesn't mean that it can be done or not. It means that it can be done and it's safe and everything involved.
Okay.
And then just a comment that it says project selected, so it might be projects.
Right. Good point. Maybe write that down, Anoop, just put projects with an S in parentheses, that'd be great.
I think another point is that we have one thing there for board decision, but often you make interim decisions as you go along.
Yeah, a lot of small
These
decisions.
Boards, I got you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important, because it is not a decision go, no-go at the end. This is, you know,
Well, like for example, doing the AR, we start off with 2 locations we're looking at, and we decided to put in a third.
Right.
So that was a change of a decision.
right, even took raw sewage water off the table.
We took
That
that
was a
off the
big
table,
decision.
that's right, another decision got changed.
Public input.
Commissioning that National Water Research Institute
Right.
panel, hearing
Listen to
from
the
people
public.
about the water quality,
Right.
setting that panel, doing those water quality studies.
And I think the point here, one of the important point is, as we described, the CEQA process, it continues. Even CEQA has fed into some of the discussions or decision points being taken off the table, raw water being one of the examples, or additional site being added. The same thing, the emphasis here is it's a parallel process. We need to be also evaluating the financial aspect in parallel with CEQA process. We don't have to wait for CEQA to be processed to take the next step. We could be analyzing, evaluating a lot of that other funding, risk, schedule implication to just get the board in the better position to make the decisions.
That's why these blue lines going through everything is not just to.
And actually, the orange and green support the financial and vice versa.
Yeah.
They can
Right.
support each other.
And so those options, those site alternatives, that the financial application, so we submitted a planning application that included the various options, and they funded the work to get that process started to evaluate the various options and further develop the projects.
That was the 2 million
Yes.
awarded by the state.
Right, it was out of the technical feasibility study that we just completed and submitted to both the state and the feds that showed, you know, 6 different options. And then, you know, where the treatment facilities were gonna be, the different pipelines, and then how much those project costs would be. So that's why when we start talking about project costs, we have these different variations that can be anywhere between $66 million and $70 million, and Anoop will go into that. But again, that kind of fed through these multiple layers. And it's this document right here. I carry it everywhere. So, you know, the theme of tonight, you're gonna just hear it a lot, is window of opportunity. So, you know, we have this window of opportunity, or windows, I think, because in May, you know, 2 big things happened. We got some information from the state on the Prop 1 grant. And then the same month, which just now seems like a blur, we got information about the federal grant. So we want to capitalize on this opportunity in a way that is, like what Tom says, it's an opportunity for us to do something early on and preventative rather than reactive of a crisis situation. We're in a really good spot. We're not like, dealing with something that's like a huge water quality issue like Flint, or tanks are breaking. Like, this is preventative, and this is a way that we can really kind of go forward in a smart manner. I'm having issues with this. So, just a couple slides, because there's a lot of acronyms and there's a lot of programs, and we're kind of really immersed in it every day on what these grants are, but we just want to take a moment just to explain the who, what, where, when, and why of the 2 grant programs. So I'm going to start, but everybody kind of feel free to chime in. There's 2 main grant programs that we're going to be talking about tonight. There's a state one called the Prop 1 Groundwater Grant, and then there's a federal one that is the Title 16. So the state California Prop 1 Groundwater Grant, that grant was passed in 2014. It was a big Prop 1 grant full of a lot of money. And this is actually a slide from the Public Policy Institute of California that showed in a snapshot visually, what were the buckets of money and how much were in each bucket and how much so far has been awarded. So we're focusing our look into the Prop 1 groundwater into the groundwater bucket. And this is this bucket right here, and they've got lots. They've got one for water storage, protecting rivers and streams, drought preparedness, water recycling, safe drinking water, and flood management. We were looking a lot at this water recycling as well, but there's a lot of recycling water projects in California, and unfortunately a lot that are further along than we are. And so just by color-wise, the orange and the gray really represent what's been allocated to the bond and what's been appropriated through the state. So you can see that anything that's either gray or orange, there's money in there. When you see the dark gray, that means that there's money already been spent out. So for the water recycling, there's been a lot of projects that have kind of gobbled up that grant money. When you look at the groundwater sustainability, there's $800 million in there for groundwater protection and prevention. And then another $100 million that's in there for GSP planning. The MGAs applied for that part of that $100 million with some of the planning grant. They got $1.5 million. But of the $800 million that's in here, there's only $15 million that's been put out so far. So there's a lot of opportunity for grant money to be potentially available to us and others that want to protect and prevent the groundwater basin. By state statute, all of the funds under the Prop 1 must be liquidated by June 30th of 2021. So that's a big driver. They want that money out there. They want projects to be funded and implemented. They have.
When you say liquidated, do you mean appropriated or spent? So those dollars must be spent by June 30th of 2021.
That was what.
So
was
a
in-
project coming on board in 2021 would not be able to liquidate that amount of funding to meet the statute requirements.
Right, and that's also why there's a big movement right now for Prop 68, and that's going to be on the ballot in June, and then the November one, because there's more projects that are out there that want that money.
Plus for those, they're not going to be immediately available.
No.
They'll
It'll
probably
take-
take several years to sign criteria to assign it.
If it passes.
If they pass.
If
If
they
it
pass.
passes, exactly.
If they pass.
Remember,
Yeah.
Prop 1 was passed in 2014.
Exactly.
That California Water Commission, the $2.7 billion, they have not spent a dollar.
That's all of the water fix.
That's the water storage.
I think
Well,
you have
those
the
are
connection to the
storage
delta for
reservoirs.
that
Yeah.
money?
Yes, there is.
Yes.
So that, how fast is this landscape changing? This says awarded to projects as of December 2017.
17.
So that's 5 months. Have things changed in the 5 months?
Yeah, I think the water recycling, assume that's all gone.
Assume this is all gone.
Those are all under contract or getting contract. So for example, the groundwater bucket that Melanie talked about, you like other agencies, have been awarded, you just haven't signed the contract, and Melanie will talk about that $2 million planning grant. But just like you have 2 million hanging out there, that little gray bucket, the dark gray circle of 15 million, will take a jump, but not a big jump. Because they did not get a lot of applications in that round one program. They awarded a lot of planning grants, and they expect those planning grant recipients to come back in round two, more likely round three, and we'll talk about our opportunities through those funding cycles. But there's still a lot of money in that groundwater bucket, but not in water recycling, not in drinking water.
Drought preparedness, a lot of people are starting to do drought preparedness plans that then
Right.
Allow them to go into the implementation
implementation.
projects.
Yeah, and not to jump too far ahead, but the gray one that we're looking at, two tweaks. One, they allowed seawater intrusion project, so that was a change. And then also through our discussions with the state board, they modified some of the other protocol which enhanced money for our customers, basically, based on our direct input. So that bucket has been opened up wider, really due to some of our diligent efforts and just seawater intrusion. They realize what a beast it is.
Yeah, that really goes to your comment about shape your future.
Right.
You saw those draft funding guidelines came out, and they didn't align so well with what you were proposing to do. They made any treatment cost ineligible for the program. And so, working with the state board, the staff was able to convince them to change those guidelines to at least allow those costs to be considered as part of the match requirement. It made a significant difference. It made a difference in funding eligibility of probably on the order of $20 to $25 million for your agency.
And I always have to put a shout out for our public advisory committee member, Larry Freeman, who sent it over to us and said, hey, check it out. And, you know, probably 25 million for our customers, you know, potentially.
And I think, to punctuate the point, I think every agency that got the planning grant considered those are going to be looking for implementation grants here in the next year, 2 years timeframe. So the demand for that bucket is going to increase here soon.
Significantly.
And to drive the point further, that's the one where they called Melanie about 2 weeks ago and said, we really think you ought to apply for this pot of money now, not
So
later.
That's one of the purposes of this meeting,
Yeah.
is to get started
Yeah.
making those
They
decisions.
called us.
To be able to do that.
Yeah, and when we went down this process and we first applied, the planning grant was capped at 1 million. It has evolved, and they actually awarded us the max of 2 million. And then they said that anybody who received a planning grant, they actually have set aside within the guidelines some funding for planning grant awardees to implement their project. You still have to be competitive, you still have to go through the process, but they've set aside 300 million.
300 million, again, there's lots of qualifiers. Well, if that's if we don't get a lot in round two, and so you still have to aggressively pursue those funds.
And there's 23 projects.
Yeah, so if you want to go online, and I don't have the statistic, but it's on there. So in December, they had 23 projects that totaled 15. They just published a new list, which we're on, that shows all of the other
I gotcha.
amount that's out there.
And then one last question for me about the liquidating the funds by the 30th of 2021, June 30th, 2021. Does liquidate mean that the state has given the money for the projects to the different agencies? Or does it mean that the agencies have to have spent it by that time?
It means that they've spent and been reimbursed. So liquidation is, you've gone through the whole process, the money's in your bank now.
Gotcha.
Do you want to,
We have a slide, they have revised that, so, but this was in the statute when they passed it.
that was the bond law.
That was the bond
And
law.
every bond law comes with a liquidation date.
Gotcha.
And even when they extend it, and they often do, I'm gonna say they always do, but even when they extend it, that doesn't mean that they're not pushing to try to meet that date. They've
Sure.
got performance standards, they see another bond law on the ballot. They wanna do as much as they can to show that they're getting this money out per the voters' motivation.
Desires, yeah. So this is a slide that just, to illustrate to you our planning grant. Oops, wow. Ooh.
Now you know. No more pushing buttons.
Oh, I did like.
Pretty
I can see there's gonna be a lot of fun games in
Lean it
here.
over, that was good enough.
I feel like Vanna.
Well, you didn't see what happened when you went that way.
I know. So this is a $2 million planning grant that we just talked about. We are actively working with the state right now to get into that grant agreement. We were awarded the grant. Lydia and I have been working with BC to put together this package. We're supposed to get the draft grant agreement this last week. We actually are going to be going up to the state next week because all of the planning grant awardees will need to go to a meeting to talk about their projects. So this is just an outline of the work that we put into this planning grant. Some and much of this work is already underway. So, as you can see, I won't go into all the details, but the CEQA environmental and permitting, we authorized a contract with ESA back in 2016 to do that effort. The technical feasibility study, that's already been completed. We have in here some new work that's done based upon where we are in our schedule, doing some pipeline alignment analysis based on the options that we've laid out in the feasibility study. 30% design of the purified water pipelines. We know those routes based upon, we don't have options. Those were just single lines that we're going to be doing. We have the pilot recharge well that was based on the recommendations of furthering evaluation of the recharge capacity, doing some geochemical analysis. That's going to be a recharge well that we'd like to do in that middle area near Cabrillo Drive.
And that came from the expert panel, didn't it?
And then, groundwater modeling, the anti-deg study, the groundwater monitoring well network, that's evaluating and placing monitoring wells to ensure that we are getting that retention time. And then, of course, project management, these district workshops, series that we're doing, decision-making, administration, and, really ensuring that we are meeting what the state is looking for. That's kind of what's in our planning grant.
Before you leave this side, a couple of things. One, to talk about some of the work that you already have underway. The nice thing about these bond measures, they always come with an eligible match date. So the eligible match date for this grant is back to the date that the Prop 1 was passed. So back in 2014. So you've started some of this work years back, and you are now getting credit from the state for doing that work. So even though this is a $4 million cost, those costs from way back when get applied to your match requirement. So it's not like you're
Spending
putting
$4 million
extra money just to get the $2 million. This is taking advantage of those investments you've already made and counting them towards your match. The other thing is, we worked really hard getting to your point about go fast, but don't go so fast that you waste. We picked those elements of the project that we could take further without wasting ratepayer money. There are some things that we know more about, so we could take those tasks further, and that's what we did here in terms of identifying the grant tasks.
So, moving forward, that was the planning grant. Now looking at the implementation grant. Again, that's capped at up to $50 million. So, with our project costs is what they are right now in the feasibility study. We've identified 2017 dollars as being a $70 million project. This is a substantial amount of grant money that we want to look into. The window of opportunity here, again, the round 2 is already open. We looked at it when it was published and it came out, and we thought, wow, we're just starting our planning grant. We're not going to look like we would be eligible and really competitive to apply for round 2. Let's wait until the next year. So the way that the Prop 1 groundwater grant goes is every year they issue out a round. So there will be another round. In meeting and talking with the state, they couldn't say yes, do it. They couldn't say no, don't. But they encouraged us to look into it because they really feel like we should apply for this because it isn't necessarily a bad indicator that we're within the doing planning grant work. we can still do planning grant work and still apply for this. And that was a really huge kind of nugget of information for us.
And I think adding to that aspect, next year, the money is gonna be lesser, and the competition is gonna be greater. So when you talk about nothing is certain, right? Getting the grant is not certain, but how do you increase your chances of getting that grant and be in the best position to secure that grant? That's what we are talking about.
And the other thing is that even though the application is July,
Right.
it's gonna take them quite some time to go through the process of evaluating all the applications and scratching their left ear, and so it may take a year for some things get applied for in July to actually come to fruition.
Right, and we can talk about the application details, and this is just the concept proposal. So how much you need to know in July versus eventually what you'll have to submit later if invited to submit the full application is very different.
When would that timeline be for the full application
We
again?
have
Yeah.
a slide on that.
Oh, good.
So,
Well, can I add one thing too? Just, the match, there's 50% match, but that could be also, you can get those funds from like a low interest loan as well, right?
Or
Or another-
federal,
or
or
federal
federal
grant.
Or
grant.
federal grant.
I just wanted to point that out.
You can do that in
Match with
addition,
another
yeah, as
grant.
part.
Yeah.
They do.
The
Right.
state can't be
Counts as
state,
match.
but federal can match state.
And I just want to highlight how great this grant is. A $50 million cap is huge. The state just went through the Prop 1 desal construction. They were capped at $10 million and happy to get it. That was a very low cap for a desal project, you guys know those costs. Plus this 50% match requirement, that Prop 1 recycled money that, Melanie showed that was pretty much tapped out. That had a 35% grant versus 65% match requirement. Again, the conditions for this groundwater program are huge. This is a great
About as
opportunity.
good as you get.
It's about as good as you get.
Do you
And it's
think it's
gonna be
because they
very,
just wanted that money? I mean, there's so much
Well,
money.
they
and
got
get
so
it
much
out.
money. I think, and we all see this, the investment is in the state's groundwater now. They got so much money.
And ultimately, the charge for them was to spend this money to bring sustainable groundwater, and they want to enable all the agencies that are trying to do that work. So let's get those projects out there, let's get those facilities constructed, so we can get onto that.
Yeah.
The whole purpose of this grant can be achieved.
And this is where your staff, affect your future. This is where their work in modifying those guidelines made a significant difference. Before, where the guidelines were written that only the groundwater parts of your project would have been eligible for either match or grant. The treatment component would not have been considered any eligible project component.
That would have had.
So your project cost would have been on the order of, your eligible project cost would have been on the order of 40 to 45 million maybe, where you would only be able to get a grant of 20 million, for example. But in working with the state board, getting those changes to the guidelines, now your eligible project costs are back up to the 80 to 90 million with an eligibility to get to the 40 to 45,
Yeah.
whatever that, 50% is. I mean, huge difference.
Yeah.
$20
Never
million
forget the day
difference.
the state board goes, so you just want this small change,
Yeah,
and that was it.
but it
for your
must-
itty bitty project,
Yeah,
I
for
think they
any
called it.
project.
No, we're an itty bitty agency.
Yes.
So, but 23 projects times 50 million it's more than the amount of money there, if all of them go for that, so it's very
Correct.
competitive.
But for example, your neighbors to the south, Monterey, Monterey County Water Resources Agency, with their big issues, they're going to be applying for a few million to do some well abandonment. You're not gonna get a bunch of people, especially because those changes to the guidelines were made because Soquel staff went up there and made those changes. So you didn't have a lot of agencies thinking that they were gonna do a groundwater recharge with the treatment and the purified water so there are not a lot of big projects like yours
And
competing
not-
for the
as
money.
we told the people back east, we're kind of special.
Sorry.
A lot of agencies are looking for some money for growth or for drought protection or whatever. And we are looking for money and water It's not just the 1,500 acre feet, we're trying to protect our entire basin. So if you
Right.
look at how much water is involved in that, it's huge, because you're talking about, you know, maybe 30, 40 years of all the water that we take out for our customers, and that's what we're trying to protect. So it's actually a huge project in that sense.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, I don't know if you have a slide on this, but we worked with the feds to get them to change their criteria on the evaluation to take in exactly what Bruce said, because it put agencies like ours at a disadvantage and our customers at a disadvantage. So it's not just about the cost per dollar per acre foot or the volume, it's about what are you really doing with that? How you maximize that? And if you're protecting a large portion of the basin, they recognize now that that should probably be taken into account. And so they said they're adjusted.
And it actually kind of fits with the EIR notion that there's the project, and then there's always an alternative, no project. And for us, no project isn't just sitting where we are. No project is saltwater intrusion continues, starts poisoning the wells, and, you know, some portion of our basin becomes unusable. So that's the no project alternative.
So, one more question from me. So, sounds like the recommendation is to go for round 2 now, before more agencies go for it. Is there a downside if we don't get it now on applying next year?
So Linda, I think you can share that we did that pros
So
and
we did the
cons.
pro-cons.
Yeah.
Just because we can doesn't mean we should, so we talked about what are the benefits, what are the negatives. The negatives, the short-term negatives, are the expenses associated with completing the application. Is it a big negative? Well, we don't think so. One, if it's just the concept proposal, that's a smaller impact. If it's the full application, we did find that in round 1, if you got asked to submit to the final application, you got the grant. Okay,
It was
so
100%, yeah.
that's not a big risk from concept to final. And so
Right.
the risk is mostly associated with the concept application. Is it a big risk? Well, guess what? If you don't get it in round 2, you're gonna apply in round 3,
Okay.
and the guidelines aren't changing in
However-
terms of the
And it
application.
won't hurt your chances.
It won't hurt your
In round-
In fact,
chances.
it'll make it better, because you will have gotten feedback about why they didn't pick you in
Right.
round 2.
They will do a debrief, and Melanie talked about how they're trying to set aside money for those that got planning money. Now they know what kind of money you're asking for.
Sure.
However, I would also add this, if you're applying and going through the motion of putting together an application, we just don't want to mail it in, we want to have the best opportunity, increase our chances to secure the grant in this application. And what increases our chances is some advancement. The feedback we received from round 1 was you want to define or at least get a general idea of what the project looks like. You want to talk about your delivery methods, how you're going to deliver the project, how they are going to be constructed. The more definition there is around this program, we don't have to define everything to the nth degree, but the more definition we can provide, it significantly increases our chances of securing the grant. So those are the things that we want to talk about, and you know, if you're applying for it, let's give it our best shot.
Right, reduce
then-
uncertainty,
Yeah.
minimize risks.
Yeah, and I said I had one last question, but I have a couple more. So there's an EIR being done right now, and in my mind, we don't have a project until we have an EIR that is certified, and so that's not a sure thing. Look, you know, who knows what's gonna happen there. So how does that play into this?
So I think that's where right in here, the grant, you know, here we talk about, these are all kind of pre-construction tasks that can be funded within, although it says implementation, there's a lot of things that can still be funded under this grant. The design and permitting can all be part of that, and as we go through, again, that parallel tracks, we may be teed up exactly to where you want to be.
So if the EIR is not certified, then we just abandon the grant and we lose the cost for preparing the grant.
Right.
And
But not entirely, because it'll be this
it was costs that you would have had to.
a similar application once you do define and
Yeah.
Select
select.
project.
Okay.
And these applications, again, it's a concept proposal due in July, but just like the planning grant, these applications consider some of these uncertainties still.
Okay.
And I think what you have to demonstrate is, they don't want to invest in your project and you completely abandon it. And so if there is risk associated with that, they might say, you know what, we'll take you to this phase in this funding cycle, and then let's revisit it later. But there are plenty of off-ramps for you and for the state. They're not gonna let you go so far that they're looking like they
They don't
invested
wanna
in
waste
a.
their money, like they
Right.
don't wanna waste our ratepayer money.
Correct.
Is the
Correct.
thought process.
And Mr. Jaffe, I think to your point earlier, as part of even the planning grant, we have some design sort of pipeline, for example. Those are advancing further already, so we are sort of, doing that where there's more certainty, we are advancing those designs, just to allow for some of the schedule implication that we'll talk about in just a moment.
And I think the last point being, because, you guys did zero in on that kind of liquidated date that was in the state statute. There is some new language that they've proposed that say, for those who are awarded in round 2, their projects, they're putting in new language that says that project should be completed by March of 2023. So again, that, really aligns well with that 2022 date. I didn't say 2023, it just says the 2022 date.
I'm just saying.
You can kill the messenger later, but.
So, and then, just 2 slides on, so that's the state, that's the Prop 1, state, up to $50 million, round 2. That's kind of the take-home messages on those. Really quickly on the Bureau, this is a federal program through their Water Smart Title 16 grant. That has been a program that is for recycled water projects. It's been, was incepted in 1992, about $640 million has been awarded. There's 2 pathways to compete for funding. And let me just tell you, this whole thing is so confusing to me. I asked somebody one time to go, create a pathway for me. And originally, it was just this congressional authorization. So you had to be written into law, kind of like earmarked, right?
It was exactly an
It was an earmark that your project would get funding. And that stopped in, we think, 2010, maybe a little bit even earlier. So up until that point, you could get on that list and then you would be awarded a project.
But that didn't mean you got money.
No.
Then you went every year to ask them for money for another earmark, because that meant you were authorized. You weren't appropriated. That was the second step. You go every year, ask them for money, they dole it out, but it was earmarks, and we all know what happened to those.
So, Diane Feinstein's office really kind of helped move this WIN Act pathway. And so this is a competitive process that started in 2016, so it's fairly new. We actually are on that pathway. The pathway for that is, we applied for the feasibility study grant, which we were awarded in May of 2017. It was a very quick process. When you look at the state versus the federal, a little bit different, a lot different. So we were awarded the feasibility study grant in May. We submitted our feasibility study in January. We got feedback on some things that we just needed to address. We resubmitted it 2 weeks later, and in February, it was awarded and accepted as complete. 2 weeks shy of the letter that went forward to Congress that said our feasibility study was complete. But either way, it was a really fast process for us. Just like what Bruce said, we learned in Denver and DC that we now qualify to submit an implementation grant. And that's, again, that kind of window of opportunity. What is the amount that is eligible for us through that competitive process? It's a $20 million maximum amount for that grant with a 25% cost share. And I think, again, one of the things that Lydia loves to do is she loves to match federal money with state money. And so I think, your example that you've shared with us in Pajaro Valley, can you tell the board that?
Well, okay, so Pajaro Valley first they defined a project that would maximize this funding opportunity, right? So they included all of the components that made up the project, the treatment facilities, the distribution system, the wells for the blend supply. That total, the storage tanks, that totaled $80 million, which then made them eligible for the maximum $20 million grant. And so through this process, it's different than the state. You compete every year for some amount of that 20 million. So this is gonna be a long process. It's not gonna be like the state. If you get awarded the full grant. But
But you can
what they-
eventually get
you
reimbursed quite a
eventually
bit.
get
right?
reimbursed for
If you
all
don't
of it. And so
Forget to go ask for it.
Paro, well, lots of people do. There's an old list of projects that just gave up. You just gotta be scrappy and persistent. Paro's facility was operational in 2009. Last year, we finally got the last 4.17 million to accomplish the $20 million grant. So that was 8 years into operating this facility. And you just go, you just keep submitting. Once they were awarded the one grant, we just kept submitting the same application. And continuing our relationship with them, demonstrating to them that they had invested in a very successful project. And so that's why we continue to go meet with the Bureau at Aqua conferences, or why we met with the Bureau in DC, because you want them to be partners in your successful project. But that 20 million that the feds gave Pajaro, those were eligible match funds to any state funding. Now, Paro's in a different situation. They have a disadvantaged community and they get their match requirements waived all the time. But for your scenario, you would use that. So if you got a Prop 1 state grant of $50 million, you would have to match with $50 million. Your $20 million in federal money is an eligible match. So then, and Anoop will show you the slide, that obviously reduces ultimately what your ratepayers are responsible for.
That's the goal.
And interestingly enough, when we were back there in Denver, we mentioned, because we got a Bureau grant about 15 years ago, and we mentioned it, and they said, oh, we were just cleaning out the desks, they were moving their offices, and had remembered us. And so we have a little bit of it was a very positive relationship. We were featured in the Bureau's newsletter and that sort of thing. But the key to this is that last bullet item, we are now eligible. We are on that letter to DC that says, this effort is eligible for funding.
Right.
So when is that coming
So I have another question.
Is that a
So
leading question?
when
Yeah.
you can't swipe
up?
quite
That
yet.
one's like,
So
it's like what?
No swiping,
That-
all questions.
What do you mean by each year you apply for money? Is it new costs that you're applying?
No.
You're just putting in and said,
Just
we've done this,
reimbursement.
and they'll say, we'll cover this much this year?
I'm
Yeah.
glad you asked that question, because from here forward, from February 2018 forward, anything you spend on the project is an eligible project cost. So
Okay.
when we apply, if we apply this funding cycle, which we expected to come out this week, anything since February of 2018 is an eligible project cost. When they send out their announcement, they'll say, okay, this 2018 funding cycle, you can apply for any funds that you plan to expend for 2 federal fiscal years. So through September 2020, what's your capacity? Oftentimes they have a cap of $4 million, which translates to $16 million in project costs. But your maximum amount that you would apply for is 25% of anything since February 2018 through September 30th, 2020.
And then
And
next
Bruce-
year you do the same thing.
And next year you apply February 2018 through September 2021.
And part of the reason for that, Bruce, is if you see back on the previous slide, they only have 20 million. It seems illogical the state would have more than the feds, but the feds have $20 million for this. Last year, I think it was 10.
Yep, it
Yeah,
was
and
10.
so they actually doubled it. So they want to double it out and
What a
the
big
best
pot.
investment for the.
Yeah, and also they're just funded year to year. So
Yeah.
Right,
it's a-
right, exactly. Good point.
When it might disappear.
It's not a bond.
Right.
Right.
It's
Good-
not a
Good
bond.
point.
It goes through these,
Appropriation.
and actually, the WIN Act had a cap, but based on our discussions in DC, they expect that that 50 million cap, they'll keep funding the program. It is a very popular program for the feds, obviously, but the challenge that they face, I think, is that most of the awards go to California, and they're responsible for the 17 western states. So they've got to show how important this is for more than just California or.
We're slight disadvantage because we're California.
But again, this is another case where you guys worked hard to affect your competitiveness.
Yeah.
You know, we talked a lot about the economic value of protecting the basin. This isn't just a 1,500 acre feet per year project. This is 15 acre feet per year of water
Protecting.
to protect the entire groundwater basin. And it's up to us, it's our responsibility to present that story in a way that they'll accept it. And they're very receptive, but they want to make sure that we present it.
Yeah. Actually, when we met with the feds at the state up in Sacramento, they said, make sure we carry that message forward because it's a make sense message.
And they actually told us who to talk to in Denver and in Washington DC,
Yeah.
which we did.
And one other point that somebody recommended, and I can't remember who now, is just to make sure we make the case that, you know, we have a large problem, but only a small district with, you know, only 45,000 customers.
Sure.
So-
Don't have much in the way of resources.
We don't, so we need to make that point too.
Yeah, I think going back to the theme of this presentation, again, there is a window of opportunity. Last year, this pot of money was 10 million, this year it's $20 million. There is some uncertainty around it, but it's also an opportunity. There is no indication that this is going to go away, but it could. So we'd rather apply and get in the line of securing this grant, and hopefully we can get to our 20 billion allocation by 2021, 2022, just how appropriation work out.
And like the state, once you submit an application, they will have a debrief. The Bureau will debrief with you on how you scored. They won't give you exact numbers, but they'll tell you where you were strong compared to others, where you were weak, and what you could do to improve your application. So the next time you go, you know, you're better. And Pajaro, they, you know, spent a lot of time just in front of the Bureau, making sure everybody from Sacramento to DC to Denver knew about their project. But once they were funded once, then they were funded every single time after that, until they got 20 million.
It's like my son took the SATs. He scored better the second time.
And have to say that the SkyTim, you know, not only the innovation, the technology, and the board's willing to invest in that, but the results of it, you know, were like eye-catching.
Yeah.
But it also says how serious we are.
Right, that's true. And didn't they change the criteria a little bit to not just favor large projects just recently?
Well, and so they had the last year's guidelines, and we all submitted comments and got our neighboring agencies to submit similar comment letters, actually all the way down to Southern California. We worked with agencies down there to submit comments about how a straightforward metric puts us at a disadvantage. We can't be compared to Orange County, that's not fair. So we worked with them to modify the metrics, have, you know,
More economic
total
analysis.
yield versus supply or demand in the region, or some other metric that at least got us to an even playing field. And they modified their guidelines, and also listened to our story and agreed that we can present this economic analysis that considers the entire basin.
Yeah, so they did, they really listened.
And things are moving, so while we talk about what's gonna be in this, it's not out yet. What we heard when we went out there is that it should be out this week. And so it would be released, and that applications again would be due in July, same time as the Prop 1 month. I thought this was just, I wanted to put this on, we don't have to spend a lot of time, but, you know, the Bureau site on the Title 16 grant has some questions that I think would be asked of people, or or staff, would be asked of by the board. So can projects apply just for planning and design and not construction funds? Yes, especially the way that it is within that 2-year cycle. Does an environmental evaluation need to be completed before applying for funds? No. Even if though this is an implementation grant, it's not required. What if a project is changed since approval of the feasibility study? Different location has been chosen or pipeline alignment has been changed? That the Bureau says that the grant administrator would work with the agency to accommodate those kinds of changes. The project is still the project, these are just some details on the components.
I have not been involved in one that hasn't changed. They all change to some degree.
And then I think we talked a lot about this one. If your project receives funding for this fiscal year, FOA, which could only be maybe
Funding opportunity announcement.
Funding opportunity announcement of $2 to $4 million. That doesn't equal 20 million. That means we can
You don't need
apply.
acronyms.
We can apply for future over and over and over.
Is there also the same component, the better defined project, more things, if you remove uncertainty, the better chance you have of success? So I
Yeah.
think that's going to be
That's
consistency.
scoring criteria.
Critical.
Yeah, project readiness is how that element is captured. Well, is there uncertainty because you haven't completed your environmental document? Yeah, so maybe you're not gonna get 5 out of 5 points on that criteria.
So we weren't gonna spend much time on this at all, because right now we're thinking free money, and then of course we'll go for loans, but the low interest loan programs that are out there right now, the WIFIA, which is Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, we did apply, I put it in this one. We did submit a letter of interest last year on this. It was a great learning opportunity for us in terms of, it was a brand new program. We submitted a letter, we did not qualify to be asked to go to the next round. We got a debrief meeting, which I thought was super helpful. And what came out of that was that, we were financially sound, so yay to the finance department, but that we didn't show project readiness. And what does project readiness mean? Our project wasn't fully defined yet, and we hadn't identified delivery model options.
But we met in Washington DC.
We
to
met,
tell them our story.
yes, yeah. And they were very helpful
Yep.
in it.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add about those low-interest loans, those are both federal funds and eligible state match funds. So if you got the $50 million state grant, you could, and $20 million federal, you could get a $50 million loan and use that as your match.
As long as it's a federal loan.
Yeah, if it's from one of these two programs, those are both eligible.
Oh, okay, because the state revolving fund
State
is
revolving
getting
fund
federal money.
Is considered federal money through the
Down through the
EPA.
EPA.
It's pushed down through the EPA.
And Lydia, does it also cover both hard costs and soft costs?
These two programs do cover both hard and soft costs.
What do you mean by that?
And I'll get into that in
Okay.
just a moment, engineering and planning.
Gotcha.
So then,
Versus-
of course,
versus
there's the
construction.
future funding opportunities. So just at the last board meeting, has passed a resolution supporting the two state Prop 68, and then the future one that just got enough signatures that'll be on the ballot. And then, of course, we're always tracking any other future funding opportunities, both for pure Water Soquel as well as our other water supply options. I think that's it for me.
Okay, here we go.
Good job,
All
Nellie.
right. So, why do we talk about all this? And,
Thanks for coming.
we talked about a lot of the funding aspect, but, what does it really mean for us, and how big is that number? So, the big question, this is from this feasibility study right here, and this is just one example. I pulled out this table as one of the alternatives that was deemed feasible in the study. This is just as an example to demonstrate the case. But the idea is overall total project construction cost, 53 million for this alternative, and those are considered the hard cost for actual putting the infrastructure in ground. But there is this engineering, legal, administrative project costs, those are called the soft costs that's associated with every single project, and some land acquisition. What's interesting to observe with this is these costs are in August 2017 dollars. And we are looking at getting our facilities constructed 5 years out. So with every year, there's escalation. We all have been observing in this area how the costs are going up. And when we talk about the window of opportunity, when we talk about the application for grant or loans, we shouldn't be thinking about this number. We should be thinking about what we would actually be paying bills for. That's how we plan for it, to think about escalations, right? The other aspect is, this is a class 4 budget estimate. So these numbers are represented as just a point estimate, more in the middle of the estimate. Generally, there is a plus 50 to minus 30%. So what that means, as the project gets defined, as the bids come in, as the market changes, maybe there is a downturn, upturn, what have you, this cost can vary. And what I want you to keep in mind is the 70 million is that range. It could be as low as $49 million if everything were to work in our favor, or it could be as high as $105 million. That's the range with the uncertainty right now.
Those numbers that you just presented don't even include the cost escalation.
Correct. These are without escalation. These are 2017 dollars. And that's where the next slide comes in. Well, this was 2017. If we shoot for facilities to be constructed by 2022, 2023, generally we talk about a midpoint of construction. So let's say in the middle of the construction sequence, we are in 2022. That's about 5 years out. And this is very simple analysis I did for this workshop. We need to actually dive deeper and really break down the costs that we talked about, hard costs, soft costs, what needs to be escalated to what level. But this is just back of the napkin example only, just to make the case how 2017, $70 billion could be potentially $90 billion. And again, applying the same spread of negative 30 to plus 50, we're looking at a range of 60 to $135 billion. Not saying it's going to cost that much, but we at least should plan for something like this number. I pulled this number from San Francisco. They are recommending escalation of 6%. They've been tracking since the downturn. The escalation every year has been going steadily up. Same thing overall for the region. We are starting to see the numbers, escalation year over year, going as high as 10% and coming down. What we've observed at Santa Clara Valley Water District, San Jose, even Santa Cruz to a large degree, and more recently at Monterey, as the bids open up, everybody's getting surprised. The labor shortage in the market is really acute, and those are starting to show up on the bids. So it behooves us to plan for something more conservative. So I just apply 5% average. We'll probably take a deeper look overall. Yeah, this is the number we want to plan for.
And presumably we'll update these as we go along,
And the range would be, absolutely. As we advance the design, the range would shrink and we'll have a much better idea of these numbers.
And I think the important point there is, when you go out for grant money, you don't want to shortchange the customer. You know, you don't want to do at the beginning of, $2017 dollars, you might want to go to midpoint of construction.
That's absolutely right. So there is no penalty for coming in under. There is a huge penalty if you shoot for this and the numbers come out here. That's some money we left on the table that now we have to shell out through either loans or through bonds. So it behooves us to plan for something more conservative, and we always look for opportunities to be more efficient.
While being, obviously, we want to be sure that we're presenting a cost-effective project, right? And we're not scaring people. But I think on your next slide, we talk about what you were getting at. We don't want to leave $5 million sitting on the table. We can apply for 45.
Right, exactly.
Or we can apply for 50.
So let me work through these numbers. I know there are a lot of numbers here. This is the same $90 million number. Of that, hard costs were $63 million, and soft costs, engineering and all that applies to 27. Now, as the typical definition of Prop 1, you can apply up to 50%. So if we think about 90 million, maybe that's only 45. However, if you think about this range, we could very well be close to 100, so why not apply for 50 million? That's already the cap, maximum. So I think we should be thinking in that regard, that apply for 50 million here. If the project comes out lower, then, you know, we won't draw against that. Same thing, Title 16 grant could be up to $20 million that Melanie walked through. What does that do? Window of opportunity, if we get these grants, all of a sudden the $90 million project could potentially turn into $25 million. That's huge. And there's a lot of uncertainty about grants, nothing is certain, but right now, the timing is right, the funding is available, there's state that is motivated to help groundwater type projects, and we want to be in the best position to increase our chances of securing these grants. And that's the window of opportunity.
So these are really big numbers. So are you gonna go into what it means and, you know, like a monthly bill? Okay.
Yeah, and not tonight, I don't believe.
Not
but-
tonight.
No, not
tonight.
a great suggestion.
But,
Translate it for the customer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not just the
I just,
customer, for me too.
you know,
Yeah, for all of us.
no, it seems like a lot, but if it's 30-year loan and it's 14,000 customers, and, you know, depends on your interest rates, of course, but just back of the envelope, I was just calculating like $10 a month.
Well, it's a quarter, you know, or 3/4 is what they say. I mean, if you just say it's 100 million and take 25 million, it's your cost, so.
Right, but a $25 million loan, if you do it over 30 years,
Correct. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Leslie, is that,
Right.
is not as much as you think.
No, but the savings, you know, I was thinking about the savings versus the cost.
Well, it's not guaranteed.
No, it's not guaranteed.
But,
And I would say
yeah, no, but what customers are concerned
Yeah,
with is the
yeah,
cost.
the cost, okay.
They're happy to have savings.
Yeah,
But
But
it also-
only in terms of the fact that they don't have to pay for it.
sure.
But you also have to look at what are the alternatives.
Sure,
Plural.
sure.
And, you know, there's deepwater desal, there's whatever the transfer thing with the city could ever end up being.
Right.
We haven't heard any cost about that, really. There's very speculations about.
Not the short-term transfer.
Well,
But that doesn't solve our problem. That's not an
Exactly,
alternative.
I know.
Right.
And then doing nothing
And,
is
and
is
the
worse.
ultimate
Yeah.
alternative of having.
Yeah, seawater.
Right.
Yeah, so, but it,
But that's a great
So
idea.
I would like
Write that
to-
down.
Yes.
Thank you, Melanie.
And I think what we should present is overall, again, from the context of window of opportunity, what is the cost of not taking action or not leveraging this opportunity? Then we're talking about this.
sure, right. Yeah.
Again, contrast that with this number. I think that's the real, the point.
You know, what it drives home, I mean, already with the $2 million grant, planning grant, the 1.5 through the MGA, the $250,000 grants that we got, you know, our small investment, Lydia, is very cost effective, has already reaped multiple dividends for the customer. So, you know, when we look at this, and the reason we present it, and, you know, we're gonna present it the way we see it and what we think's right, it's, in many ways, it'd be a disservice not to pursue it for the customer because of the percentages. You know, we may not get that federal money, but still, when I lay out the odds, and I used to be a risk assessor, it's in the best interest to at least try. The amount, if you do it a number of times, you'd win.
And, you know, we will try and do the best we can for our customers.
Right.
And can't do any more.
Right.
So, again, I want to go back to this table. This is just one of the alternatives.
Yes.
This is not by any way the selected alternative or direction, but this, you know, it's just to demonstrate the point of, you know, worst case cost and how it allows us to position better.
So, is that alternative kind of midpoint alternative in terms of
It's
cost?
one of the highest, I believe.
On the highest.
It's one of the highest.
And then, so you've got your inflation causing the cost to go up for construction costs. Does that apply to soft costs too?
Yes, it does.
It's like 5 million a year.
Yeah. And Dr. Jaffe, I know you had a question about soft costs. I think, Anoop, the slide before that showed
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
had it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So does that help define it right there? Yeah.
So people are making more money.
Indeed, the costs are going up, and in fact, Lydia, you have a point?
Well, I was just gonna you talked earlier when we were going over this, that while you're gonna escalate the hard cost to midpoint of construction, you're not gonna escalate the soft cost to midpoint of construction.
So the sooner you take care of the design, where, you know, there's
Sure.
this huge
I
curve of
gotcha.
how the money gets spent,
Right.
sooner you take care of those engineering decisions, for example, you don't have to pay for all that extended cost. And all this is back of the, consider this as a back of the napkin type analysis. We need to get into details
Sure.
of what costs need to be escalated, by how much, and then really the construction cost would come in a little bit later. But it was just to do a quick analysis of, you know, driving home the point of a
There will be
yeah,
escalation.
Yeah, well, we know that.
And the numbers are surprising, because every year you don't make decision, in 2023, this becomes $95 million, and then spread.
Right.
Every year,
So take 23 off there.
I tried to tell them.
well, so let's talk about,
The pressure.
let's talk about, in order to take 2023 off, what do we need to do?
There you go, good segue.
We have these opportunities, I think the dates are there, we've talked about it. The point really we want to drive home is, yes, there is a concept application, final application October, November. We want to get in a position that we increase our chances of securing this grant. And there are elements we need to get there. Same thing for Title 16. Like November timeframe, we want to be in the best position to secure that grant. How do we get there? So let's walk backwards. 2022, all right? You know, we have this pin already marked in there, and in order to make things,
Maybe swipe? Maybe swipe left.
so before the facilities get operational, we all know there needs to be construction, contractor procurement, detailed design, design engineer procurement, preliminary design, and we talk about pending decisions. To add to the point, if we take out 24 to 30 months and contractor procurement, that puts us at early to mid 2020 to get that process started. Subtract 12 to 18 months of detailed design and design procurement, it's early to mid 2019. That's 6 months, 7 months from now. Pending decision, outstanding issues, well, that puts us yesterday. We need to have certainty in there to move things forward in order to hit this milestone. What's critical about it, it's not just the board's milestone, right? There's the funding or grant we talked about, that's also March 2023. There's also the element of SkyTem data. We want to be able to have this facility up and running so we can protect our sole source of water supply. So a lot of that drives towards not just the funding aspect, but even purely just stacking up the schedule. We need some decisions, direction to start moving things forward. Now, having said that, I want to go back to our parallel track. EIR is ongoing. Technical feasibility is ongoing, it's evolving along with the EIR. But even from funding, risk, and schedule standpoint, we need to make some decisions, have some direction to make sure that we are on track to achieve the goals that you have set for this community, for this program. And maybe, you know, continuing with the theme of parallel track, if EIR is not certified, maybe we advance the design on all three options together. To what level? There is some element of inefficiencies because now we are advancing design on all three potential options. But at the same time, it has a huge benefit on the back end. When we talk about incremental cost of engineering to the grant funding and the cost of not doing the project by 2022 or 2023, that's a $5 million cost that right off the bat, not to mention the damage to the aquifer.
Can you go to the back of the previous slide? So one thing that immediately would come to most folks is we have two procurements there.
Yes,
And if we did design build, there would only be one procurement.
absolutely.
It might be a little more complicated.
Correct.
So it might take longer than either of those, but it's certainly not going to take the combination of those.
Correct.
So that's one way to Accelerate.
Right, so there are avenues, and we will talk about, there are these series of workshops that you referred to earlier on. We have lined up, and idea is to define those projects, which projects are better from design bid build, which one are better suited for design build. So those workshops will happen, and we'll make those decisions here in the next couple of weeks. In fact.
That's right.
Other questions? Okay. So, we talked about, what are the directive we are looking for from the board. Tackling. Is we want to, get to the design and construction of, advanced water purification facility. We believe the pipeline aspect is fairly linear. We can break it up into multiple pieces to have multiple fronts. As far as the advanced water purification and tertiary system, those are big chunk, and we believe, at least in my month and a half of involvement, having observed other projects, that is going to be the one that drives the schedule. And we need to start moving on those elements quicker. There's also a lot of other stakeholder involvement. We're going to be working very closely with the City of Santa Cruz. So what level of interface that drives, getting their input in the process. And believe it or not, right now I'm concerned about that 12 to 18 month design schedule. That's already very aggressive. So all of that, again, to drive home the point, the sooner we can get going on those elements, the better off we are.
So, I think with, as Anoop said, he's only been on board since March. And the first thing we did was, I just basically gave him like, okay, here's the project, this is what we've done, this is what we've developed, here's the schedule. Now let's lay it out and kind of like look and see where our weaknesses were and where there were opportunities. And he immediately was like, okay, how important is this schedule, right? How important is that date? And I said, it's pretty important, it's been there since 2015. And so with that, he was basically, as we started looking and we were just finishing the budget process with Leslie and putting that draft budget together, putting in our grant agreement for the state, he was like, you guys don't have money in there for treatment, and that's a driver. And so that's one of the things I really wanted to bring up tonight, is that at this point, this is a critical issue. We haven't put in money for that yet.
How much are you talking about?
Well, I think that depends on some direction from the board, like what Anoop said. Are we gonna do it on multiple sites? Are we doing what level of design on each site?
Correct.
What are the delivery models that may be able to reduce costs, reduce time? Is there a reduce or increase in risk? Those are some things that need to be talked about through those workshops.
From a planning standpoint, I would put, if it's a design bid build, we talk about 10% design and then letting the designer take over. That's the right way to do it. If it's a design build, we'd like to do it up to 30%, so there's enough definition of the project for design builder to execute. Either it has a different cost. Right, absolutely. I would say anywhere from 2.5 million, roughly, plus or minus. And all of that may not get expended into
This fiscal year.
It may spread over to the next fiscal year, depending on when we actually get started. So I hate the word earmark, but that's something you probably want to put as an earmark. And then as we get closer to the, pulling the trigger on it, that's when we define, we'll have a much better handle on the number.
Now, there is the issue that, as you were pointing out, there are various segments to this project. And some are easier to design, and so you could start those.
Right.
And, yes, okay.
You're right on. Absolutely. And then, as you mentioned, district, understanding our infrastructure and what we are really good at, we really understand the pipeline aspect. We have in-house expertise and we understand the lay of the land. So pipelines might be better off doing the design bid build where we can control the process. We have a lot of input from the staff, also from the alignment standpoint. Advanced water purification or tertiary treatment, that's a little bit unique. That we, as an agency, we haven't done that before. So what we could do is we can lay out the performance criteria We lay out general aspect input from the staff or other peer agency, get their input, define those criteria, and then allow the design builder to provide their innovation and get things rolling. Those are some ideas here depending upon, so the point is pipeline may be better suited for design bid build. Advanced water purification, maybe design build, potential design build operate. There's another one that caught a few folks by surprise, CM at risk, that's another delivery model. We can talk about, it has its own advantages, right? Every coin has its two sides, which side is more preferable to us?
What does it mean?
So, great question.
The coin.
With a 10% design, you can bring in a construction manager on board.
That's
And
the CM.
That's a
Got that.
CM, and that CM gives you guaranteed maximum price to deliver that project. And it's that CM's responsibility then to bring in the contractor to execute the project. So,
That's what they did for the desal plant down in San Diego.
so we have a workshop or a meeting plan to walk you through all of
Okay,
these
this is
delivery
a
models.
separate, it's, yes.
Yeah, this is just a.
This is just a quick overview
But
of.
that's something we could potentially make a decision about which delivery model we want regardless.
Independent, right, it's independent of any of the other tracks.
Well,
Where,
it helps some of the other ones to make clear what the
Correct.
process is.
Right, from, the hat that I'm wearing, it helps me with the schedule to deliver the program on time. It helps me with the cost.
And it also
Yeah.
helps with the funding, because that's something you have nailed down about your project.
right, eliminating
Well,
uncertainty.
yes.
For like the state grant, not a big deal, we're mostly talking about the project, not the delivery method. When we applied for WIFIA, they're like, you guys haven't selected your delivery alternative, you're not ready.
Ready.
And so it really kind of depends which program we're talking to, but yeah, again, anytime you eliminate any uncertainty, anytime you can check a box and say, we've decided,
Yeah.
it obviously helps.
And one of the things that Nuke alerted me to, even though we don't have a certified EAR and we don't know how that's gonna come out, just letting contractors know we're going toward one thing, they need a year or so ahead of time, and so you'll get a much more competitive bid, which benefits our customers, that we're, looking at this option or the other option.
Market sounding, there, in fact, I can share some data later on. There's a statistical analysis, if you have two bidders, the costs tend to be anywhere from 20 to 30% higher. If you have four bidders or five, the costs tend to be -2 to +5%. It's right within the estimate, because they know the landscape, they know who all are bidding, they're calling the same suppliers, and they know they need to keep their pencils sharp and reduce their profit margin. So all of that to give the certainty to the market, do the market sounding that this project, we will be bidding out in December of 2022. And they can say, yep, when that Monterey plant is constructed, I'm gonna move my foreman to this site. This is part of their business strategy. So more certainty you can project, the better off you'll reap the benefits of better bids,
And cost savings.
substantial cost savings.
But it's certainly difficult, because if you were kind of making sort of decisions very early on, before the EIR is even done for you.
Yeah, contingent.
We're talking about not
Yes,
doing
they're
this.
contingent, they're just decisions contingent
Yes,
upon them.
that's right.
Trying to make
That's
the
exactly.
decisions.
best investment for the customer, realizing that it's, that uncertainty out there and all that.
And I think, so just observation from other projects, other clients that we have worked with is, going back to that parallel process, this in itself is a huge driver for decision making. CEQA is equally important. What I've observed with other clients is multiple different options they have aside from no project. They'll be within the margin of error on the environmental impact. Of course, you have one site that has huge impact that gets eliminated, but these are within the margin of error. Funding, financial risk mitigation, that ends up being a huge driver as well. So I've seen a lot of boards make decisions on this as one of the factors, as well as a lot of these factors. You want to take in all that information and make the best decision. So a couple of meetings we have planned for, I think,
Oh, you want me to?
yeah, if you,
Sure. Okay, so this is, there's a lot of moving things, and we live this every day, so just so that you guys have the heads up, on June 5th, we do have a couple items that we want to, bring the board and the public up to speed on the Pure Water Soquel project. Lisa Moore, who's the project manager for the environmental work that is being done, will be presenting to the board a CEQA 101.
Are these gonna be just agenda items, or will they be workshops tagged on
This
the
is just-
front or back of the normal meeting?
This is an agenda item.
Both of them.
Two
Yeah,
different.
both
Okay.
of them. So this will be an agenda item. She's gonna do a presentation on the EIR. We are still anticipating the release at the end of June. And so she'll give us a kind of a whole walkthrough of the EIR process, the public input, how we'll receive comments, how they'll respond to comments, the draft, going to a final EIR, and then what's next after that. We also want to kind of give an update on the whole Pure Water Soquel project. There's a lot of moving things. We talked a lot about funding tonight. We've got the pilot plant that's operational right now over at the Santa Cruz wastewater treatment plant. Bringing that all to speed. We also, we're going to be talking about what you guys just saw, that planning grant had a lot of work and effort that is going to be needing contracts and support. So we're going to introduce what those entail, but we're collecting and we will be bringing those scopes and contracts back on June 19th. So on June 19th, this is very typical of what most of us do at the end of a fiscal year, is we get everything that we anticipate to spend in that next year, and we execute contracts. We create addendums to existing contracts. We'll be bringing that on June 19th, and that'll include this work that we already talked about already.
And then maybe, there's an element of just setting up the program overall to get ready for the 2023 delivery, 2022
2022.
of the program.
Right, and then on June 19th, we're also going to be asking the board to adopt resolutions to apply for both of the grants. Very similar to what we did when we applied for the feasibility. We need to have a resolution that we apply and submit with our grant application. And then, hanging out there, we'd love some kind of input on what to do, and maybe that'll evolve as we go forward with some of these workshops, is what level of effort do we want to support in this next year or two for preliminary design of the facilities?
For myself, I would find it difficult making some of these decisions without ever having seen the EIR. And if the EIR could be accelerated, if it's not ready, it's not ready. But if it could come out, mid-June or something, to allow, some of these decisions to be made with that in mind, that would help me a lot, like the others.
Well, absolutely. But I don't know.
I think,
Just feedback.
Yeah.
yeah.
I realize it's in
I'm not sure.
several stages
Yeah.
of review, but
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think with
it is a
I
draft.
think with the EIR, and I know that there's, a lot of importance hinging on that decision, but most of the environmental impacts, Lydia always goes, oh, it's the EIR, there's either gonna be the red flags, it's gonna be just significant and unavoidable, and you'll have to decide whether or not there's some overriding considerations that the board would take in terms of agreeing to move forward with the project. For example, with the well master plan, there was significant and unavoidable impacts related to construction, impacts of noise, and that was something that couldn't be avoided. You're drilling 24 hours a day, it's temporary, and that, even with mitigations, you can't reduce. With most of the environmental topics that are going to be within the draft EIR, they will look at that. They'll say, is there a red flag, or is there a fatal flaw that you can't do something, or is there an issue, an impact that then they will go through and they'll identify if there's mitigations that can be in there.
I understand,
So-
but, for example, we were talking about doing design of 30% on one and 20% on the other and 10%. And if one of the projects has significant and unavoidable impacts, I'm less likely to want to do
Right.
30%.
Right, and we wouldn't ask, that would be kind of our back and forth of, pros and cons of something. We wouldn't want to do that,
So Dr. Daniels, I think to answer your question, the money will be spent on design incrementally. By the time we even prop up the team to begin the design, you'd have draft EIR in your hand.
Right.
Yes.
So you would know if there's a fatal flaw aspect. But
The flip side is, doing the applications for financing, it would probably help to be able to say, this is the site we're probably gonna build it at, or we will build it at, or something like that.
Yeah.
Versus right now, well, it could be here, it could be there, it could be, we don't
Well,
know.
So I think we're teed up okay. The release of the draft DIR is, we're working long hours
I
to
know,
get that
I
out.
know.
So June 20th,
Mhm.
June 30th is that window that we're anticipating to go out. These applications are due end of July.
And Lydia, can you explain the applications, and there's even a stepwise process, we're trying to anticipate exactly what you're saying, we realize we don't wanna put you at a disadvantage in trying to make a decision, so the applications, while you're certainly better off having everything defined, that's just not the world we live in.
Right.
So can you just talk about this?
Yeah, so for example, the feasibility study that we submitted and was approved by the Bureau, that feasibility study already includes the potential for this site or that site or this alignment or that alignment. And so applying for the project, they already expect that we still have some uncertainty. But what's important is to show them that while we don't have a certified EIR yet, this is our track. This is our track, and the timeline is such that, we're consistent with their objectives in terms of funding. And also, we will have information about, were there any fatal flaws? Were there, and I suspect it's gonna be what, like Anoop said, they're all these alternatives have some degree of impact, and most, if not all, can be mitigated, but they're all gonna be within this umbrella.
And there's a stepwise process, like to the grant, you submit a kind of overarching grant, and then you come back, and that second time,
Yes.
it has to be much more detailed, and that would probably be several months later.
Yeah, and just
Maybe
like
November,
even our
right?
planning grant, what we are getting a contract to do in our planning grant is not what we submitted a planning grant application on. It was negotiated with the state. Well, this is what we thought we needed at the time, this is how far we've gotten now, this is what the state is willing to invest in, given some of the uncertainty they see within the district. This is not,
What you put
your
in.
concept proposal in July is not gonna be your final grant contract. And even your final grant contract and agreement, I'm gonna say every grant contract I've worked on has been amended. Whether it's because of schedule, scope, or budget, there are amendments because things change.
And given that this grant covers soft costs, which includes engineering, they expect, hasn't been a single engineering project where things haven't changed or evolved during the process. That's the whole
Right.
idea, from concept to a detailed design, and they expect that, so I think.
Yeah, where you get in trouble is if you somehow change your project and you're not meeting the benefits that you promised. Well, we are, we expect to develop a project or a program that delivers 1,500 acre-feet per year. If you just changed your mind and said, well, you know what, let's just do something less, or, I don't know.
And I'll just add,
You
President.
can change.
We hear you loud and clear, and
When I had one other thought,
Yeah.
just to
Yes,
throw
go.
out there, just that, if it would help, and we need, we don't have a meeting in July 4th, but if we need a meeting on the 26th or something, we might want to keep that date open.
you will be seeing some additional meetings,
I'm just saying.
yeah,
It
so.
could
that would-
be, it could be another workshop, not a full.
Yeah, it could be additional work, and I'll put it out there that, like,
I don't know.
Carla Christensen was out, she's out of the state, I will meet with her personally, so if some of you can't make that meeting, or some of these meetings, doesn't mean you won't get the information, we can meet with you in a one-on-one,
But if
and that
we
would
need
be
to make
great.
any decisions that might be
Yeah.
helpful, like even just a specific one thing that we need to make a decision about, doesn't have to be a workshop, it could be an actual decision-making meeting,
Yeah.
if need be, but then maybe the IR is out by the 26th, I don't know, just keeping that date
Okay,
open.
okay.
Because clearly there's some important stuff going on here.
Right,
Yeah.
and we're constantly trying to, this is the perfect example of stuff we learned and we recalibrated, brought together everybody.
Yeah.
It's evolving at a much faster pace. But because, again, this window of opportunity, going back to the theme of the meeting, it's very narrow, it's open right now, both from meeting our deadline overall, 2022, funding, EIR, a lot of those things are coming together, so we want to make sure that we stay through, get our project through this window of opportunity while it's open. Couple of workshops that we have identified, just to help you make decisions or be better informed, and we can subsequently bring those resolutions for approval. You know, we are talking about this, key drivers. I think we have established that if there's something more that we need to discuss, if there's additional analysis that you want to get done, maybe we can plan for another workshop just for those specific elements. You want to get to the project definition and interface of different projects, to talk about delivery methods, which one is better suited for where, and also understand what stakeholders are involved on each project. Later on, we have another workshop specifically to talk about delivery methods, design build, design bid build. It could be a couple of hours worth of session. There might be some pre-work coming your way to become more familiar, and then be ready to make some decisions. Again, this element is agnostic of what CEQA says. This has no bearing on what environmental impact are, so that we can move forward with these elements independent of the CEQA process.
And note that all 4 of those are probably in the month of June.
Wow.
So.
Yes.
We're with you.
This bottom 2 are important from Leslie's standpoint. We have a district has a parallel rate study ongoing. And a lot of this input uncertainty needs to be built into the rate study, at least for how the 10-year pro forma or rate impacts are being evaluated. So what we want to do is give our best estimate of the project cost to Leslie for input into the rate study. And of course, as the grants go, we'll adjust and adapt as we need to.
Because if you're talking about a 3 to 5 year rate study, you're encapsulating the project timeline.
Yep. I think that's all we had.
Yeah. We're gonna turn it back to you.
Okay, so,
Okay, thank you guys.
yeah, thank y'all. Thank you for, amazingly coming together so quickly for the meeting tonight, members of the public. Right?
Before we move on,
Okay.
public hearing on that, or public input on what we've just been.
Yep, so I'll turn it over to you to open that up.
Okay. So, any public comment on what we've been talking about?
I do.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Becky Steinbruner. It distresses me a little bit. Dr. Jaffe, I want to thank you for bringing up continually the EIR and the importance of that, because that is the vehicle for the public to weigh in on all this. And it distresses me a little bit to see that it's going to be pushing forward so fast before that opportunity for the public to even get involved. And you will hear from the public that this is a done deal. And you will hear from the public when they see the money. I mean, yes, you may get the grants, but as the very kindly, and I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, said, it's 8 years before the Pajaro people got reimbursed. So your ratepayers are going to have to carry this. And they're already looking at rate increases. And if I misstated what you said, I apologize, but that's what I understand. So to me, this is looking more and more like a done deal. And I understand that, the carrot is there and you've got to go for it, but what I see happening here is the focus on winning the prize and not going with the public's input. I've seen no discussion about a public ballot, which I've been asking for many times, and many members of the public would like to see. So that's my impression of this information tonight. Thank you.
Can I just say that the focus is on saving the aquifer? Whatever we need to do, just so you know, not on some prize. That's the prize for me.
I understand that, but the Rambo
No-
study
no
was
back
a
and forth.
snapshot. It was a
Okay, okay,
snapshot.
Sorry, you're right.
Oh, okay, no.
You're next.
Hi, Shauna Mora, City of Aptos resident, part of the Carissima Aquifer, with a whole group of people who have private wells. So I appreciated being able to sit here and listen. It was way more detailed than I expected. I don't know why I didn't think it was going to be detailed. And it's clear that there's been a tremendous amount of work, and I'm heartened to see that there's been so much effort put into trying to find ways to be able to get grant money and also to be able to find matching funds. A part of me coming here and making a comment is I realize I'm, as a lot of members of the public, do not have the same detailed information that you have, and so kind of feel like I don't want to ask stupid questions and uninformed questions. And to a certain degree, I have to agree with Becky in that it feels like this is a done deal. The train's left the station and it's happening. My questions were, it's clear that what are we, 29,000 acre feet overdrawn?
That's what, well, we're overdraft.
Okay, last I heard it was 29,000.
Okay.
But again, I don't know. And so my question is, what's happening with new well, applications to be able to have new wells? How much of the recycled water is going to be used for projects that are in the process, and can this recycled water be used directly for new developments instead of? I understand that the recycled water is partly to be able to, or maybe largely to be able to handle seawater intrusion. And so there needs to be something that's going in there that keeps the seawater from coming in. And so it's been helpful. Of course, I could have come here at any point and looked at all this, but apparently didn't have the motivation. And so it's good to see all the different things that are happening. And if I understand it correctly, after all these treatment processes, it goes into something like percolation ponds, which recharge wells, so that in addition, after all this treatment, it's going to be like, to be oversimplifying, like a septic system where it's going through lots and lots of ground and before it reaches down into the aquifer. So
Right.
I think the fear for some of the members of the public is that you were going to be pumping this water directly into our aquifer where our well water tastes so good, and is it really going to be taking out hormones and antibiotics and so many of the pharmaceuticals that could have other implications. So part of me is making a comment, and also it's heartening to see this, and actually if it does need additional treatment for like the Soquel water, because we're not part of the Soquel water, so thank you for even allowing me to come here and speak, system. I think I remembered hearing that there would be something that would be put through the pipes to be able to handle anything that might be a consideration, but what are private well owners supposed to do? And how will we know if our water is being in some way tainted, and what we would need to do? So thank you again, I appreciate it.
And we're certainly welcome to meet with a one-on-one with you to answer any further questions.
Okay, thanks.
And I've done some studies too, if you'd like to meet with me.
Okay.
That's my contact. We are indeed, looking.
Can I respond?
Oh, okay.
Are you going to respond?
I was going to, yeah.
Go ahead, you respond on
We are indeed looking for a finance plan for this one particular project. And the reasons we're not looking for finances for the other ones is we don't control them. The transfer thing is owned and controlled by the city of Santa Cruz, and they need to be out there looking for funding for themselves, for everyone who's going to use it, but it's their project, so they have to apply for the funding. We can't do it. They also kind of need to finish designing what they're doing exactly, but that's another thing. And similarly for Deepwater Desal, that's another one that we're looking at. It's not our project, it's the Deepwater Desal Corporation, and they need to be looking at funding. One of the advantages now is that private entities can apply for some of these funding things. It doesn't have to be a public agency like we are. So I'm hoping they're doing that kind of thing. They're actually into their EIR now, like we are. The city is not even close to that yet. So that's part of the problem, is that it looks like it's a done deal because we're trying to take advantage of the fact that this is something we're responsible for, and there are other options that we're not responsible for, so we can't do anything with. You want to comment on things?
Yeah, in my mind, it's not a done deal, but you have to gather the information to see what the deal is. And so, you know, the alternative would be to do nothing for half a year or however long it takes for the EIR to be certified, if it is going to be certified. And that doesn't seem like it's a prudent thing to do. So it's a balancing act. But in terms of all your questions, those are really good questions. Those are questions that I have as well. And the filter I put on all this is, I've got kids who I think will probably end up living in this area, hope they will. And I don't want anything to be unsafe for them in terms of the water, so I'm not glossing over things. I'm taking a very close look at whether or not there are safety issues, and so far I have not found any, and I've been looking very hard for it.
I think we all have. 'cause,
Yeah.
I mean, I had
The whole
the same
board has
deal.
been very concerned about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and can I add? So tonight was focused on pure water Soquel because there's many decisions need to be made. I think we budgeted $250,000 for the river transfers or some large number. And I guarantee this week, gallons and gallons and gallons of water have been shipped back, or at least recently, to back east. And so there's an ongoing thing there to see about the exchange of water. And that was presented recently by Taj in a previous meeting. So there are parallel efforts. While there's parallel efforts going on with this, there's parallel effort going on. We're not in control of that, so we're not the lead, but we are partnering with the city of Santa Cruz. So.
And one other thing, just to mention, at the recent joint meeting between the Water Commission and the City Council, Santa Cruz City Council, there was discussion about all the things that they're up to. And they actually, from the Water Supply Advisory Committee, have three possibilities they're looking at. One is the transfer, one is recycled water, and one is desal. And they say they were not going to pick between the three of those until they have all the information, and that will be at the end of 2020. So there is nothing more other than this 300 acre feet for them to even offer us until then, according to what they said to the council. So if that's true, you know, we just have to wait for them and see what might happen.
We just don't think it's prudent to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, be ready.
We're safe.
Right.
So what more do we need here?
I think we're
I think we
good
can
for tonight.
if
You
we're
will
all-
see.
If everyone's happy and said everything you
Well,
want
it's
to
a
say.
lot of information.
It's a lot
It is a lot of
information.
information, and there'll be
Clearly,
continually a lot.
It's gonna be coming back real soon.
Yeah,
So-
great presentations.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
thank
next
y'all.
week-
Very
Next week,
nicely
in
done.
fact, next Tuesday, there'll be 2 more presentations and I assume discussions and so forth.
Yeah, but we're trying to be as transparent and bring everybody along as we move forward. We realize these are, you know, big decisions and want the board to be fully knowledgeable as much as we are, because it's a lot to
If these
disseminate.
applications are needed by the end of July,
Yeah,
there's 60
yeah.
days.
I mean,
Make lots of decisions and have lots of discussions.
And even though it seems like, you know, that's aggressive, I would hate to look at somebody 10 years from now and who's paying a high bill and say, well, why didn't you go for those grants? You know, why didn't you try harder?
yeah.
You know, so I figure, you know, you're not gonna please everybody all the time, and I feel like my commitment is to those people 10, 20, 30 years from now.
And
So,
let me put an exclamation mark on that. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, Taj and Melanie were sitting in here. A gentleman called up and asked to talk to Taj. And he came in and he said he just had a refund, the farmer, I think it was around $22,000, that's farming his land, even though he's served by us, because his well has been recently seawater intruded till it's no longer capable. Until you see somebody sitting here at the table, has lost that ability and doesn't know what to do, and this, you know, and you just go, wow, this is real, you know.
Came and asked us for help.
Yeah, came to ask us for help, and, you know, you're just like, wow. You know, it just happened, just had a refund,
Was that La Selva Beach?
so.
All right.
right, Good.
Thanks for everyone coming in and making time in your schedule to have it.
But thanks, everybody.
What
Really
works for you?
appreciate it.